Okay, so this is our last series of videos, and this is over Reagan, culture wars, and recent American history. So about from the 80s to 2008. So first off, I just encourage you to take a moment and check out these pictures. Look at and see how many you think you can identify from movies to famous politicians to some other things that like The Simpsons, maybe some boy bands. Take a look, see what you can recall. Okay, so this is a follow-up essentially from the last videos in the 70s. Coming into the 80s, we're coming off of the women's rights movement, a push for equal access to education and family and employment issues, tackling domestic violence, control over women's bodies. Betty Friedman, a big advocate of that, the National Organization of Women, the development of Planned Parenthood, and really the situation of a rising two-person family, so that you need two people working to afford to live in America, and affirmative action are all big parts of the women's rights movement. And into the 80s, we're going to see there's beginning to be some backlash against this. And I previously mentioned Title IX, so that women's participation in particular in sports, Roe v. Wade, legalizing abortion, and the constitutional right to privacy for women. Women begin to be much more active in politics, and this idea of women's liberation, and the Mrs. Magazine forms. So we're going to see obviously some people very much against this and for it. So these are going to be some culture war issues. So and that kind of leads us into our next thing. There's a conservative backlash. So people saw that these changes that happened in the 60s and into the 70s, really not everybody felt like this was a good thing, right? That America was going downhill, right? And so America's foreign policy, America's seen as a weak and a changing country. We lost Vietnam, and affirmative action pushing towards involving by mandate by the government that minorities be included in the workplace and in government, and women's liberation. So really that these are seen as dividing lines in America, as the picture down here shows. So another pretty significant area of change in America was Latino Americans. That as America has a lot of immigrants, we're a nation of immigrants, and in particular those Latin American immigrants found work in agriculture. And as you might imagine, these were low pay, and the conditions were not very good in agricultural industry. And a guy who becomes the leader and kind of the face of this movement, Cesar Chavez over here, works to form the United Farm Workers, which is a union to represent agricultural workers. And they use boycotts and are pretty effective at raising wages and gaining media attention. And another group in that same time period, about from the 60s to the 80s, that were pretty socially active were Native Americans. And they form a group, American Indian Movements, or AIM, and they work to protect several areas that were important to Native Americans, and one that is the protection of their rights as nations. They are sovereign nations, tribes located in the United States, and so they wanted guarantees of some of the treaties that the United States had formed, and protection, like I said, of sovereignty of themselves, and they pushed for protection from the Constitution and laws. So Native Americans are pretty active in some up and some down ways. We'll talk about that a little bit more in class. And now getting on to the big idea of growing backlash. So some Americans who would be probably more conservative really began to feel like some of these changes, these pushes for minority groups and these changes socially and to the culture in America were not necessarily what they would envision for America. So they felt like issues like quotas for affirmative action was not necessarily a good thing. And so there's some early gains, I guess, from the conservative movement. That one, limited quotas or got rid of them. That two, that Medicare and the Hyde Amendment is limited for things like abortions. And there's the rise of what was called the moral majority, that most Americans, they believed, backed moral issues. So most Americans would oppose things like abortion and some other things. So this was a big shift politically. This is where Southern Democrats become Republicans, probably the Republicans that we would typically be familiar with today. And so this becomes a lot of working class white people, and especially in industrialized urban areas, and the new suburbanites start to put the blame on immigrants and the poor for some of the problems that come about and the decline of Americans. So this is in general, we'll look a little more specifically though. So one conservative ideology, we can see some pictures that really, I think, tell part of the story here, but one pointing to liberals ignoring some of the changes that were going on in America's decline, especially in manufacturing and in the industrial base. They disagreed with this idea of tax and spend that was put out in the Great Society with LBJ and the War on Poverty, and instead they focused on issues that they aligned with. So things like creationism and family values. They wanted to cut government spending and stop the communists and end abortion, and they wanted to limit immigration. Other big parts of typical or a modern conservative ideology would be the support of a strong military and national defense, America's strong use of its global power, an emphasis on individualism and personal responsibility, that the government is going to help you out, you have to do for you. And this really led to some culture wars we're going to see, and the Reagan Revolution. And along with this is also this idea of a religious fundamentalism, and in some cases, some people would say extremism. So connecting politics and faith is a big part of the conservative ideology starting in the late 70s into the 80s. So here is one of the leaders early in the conservative movement, and this is Jerry Falwell. I'll ask you to read this quote, and we can see in this quote a pretty big clash between two different types of people in America, and we'll see this will be defining our country more and more. So I'm going to pause here, and I'll ask you to do the same, and if you just want to read this quote. Okay, so I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about this quote and other culture war issues in class. Other things that continue to be a part of the conservative concerns are what they saw as the excesses, sex and drugs, and all the changes into American culture, really the loss of control of America, and the changing of America with diversity and pushes for equality, social issues like gay rights and divorce and abortion, more and more children being taken to daycare, big government and the decline of kind of the traditional nuclear family, and they wanted to stop the ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment, and a kind of a new traditionalism that was beginning to show up. So they didn't like the idea of this emerging Simpsons family. They wanted to go back and maintain what they saw as the traditional idea of family. And the American malaise, we mentioned this in a previous video, that America was seen as soft and really declining. Things like the oil embargo really showed and highlighted our national weakness as far as energy, stagflation, our weak economy, and deindustrialization as jobs begin to be lost in the industrial sectors of our economy. And the Iranians hostage crisis, like we said earlier, really showed that America could be held hostage by its enemies, and that the Soviet Union seems to be strong as it invades Afghanistan. We'll see that'll be a bad idea a little bit later on. So in particular, some of these images over here to the left are pretty important. Understanding stagflation, where GDP growth of the economy is down, unemployment's up, corporate earnings are down, and inflation is up. So the price of goods and less jobs, and the decline of manufacturing. We can see this trend continues way beyond the 80s and into our decade. There we see it. And so just a quick review of some of these main ideas. We saw one, the women's rights movement really pushes society and changes it in some part, as well as with Latinos and Native Americans. And some Americans who would identify them as conservatives really have some issues with some of these changes going on, that they're less comfortable and less familiar with this new America that's emerging, and this idea of American malaise, that America maybe is entering a period of weakness and decline, and they want to actively push towards an America where they want to see. So we're going to have a couple other videos here, so check them out. All right, and also post any questions if you have them. Have a good day, guys.